Hello, my name's Chris from Mangahigh, excuse me, and I'm going to be taking the Mangahigh lesson for you today. We're going to be starting in just a couple of minutes time, so hopefully you've already got logged into Mangahigh and you've got pen and paper ready. I'll speak to you in a few moments. Okay, let's make a start. So the first thing you need to make sure you've done is logged into Mangahigh. If you've got a login, go to the home page, click on login and get logged in. Hopefully you've already done that. If you don't have a Mangahigh login, or if you can't remember your password, then you can create a login for this session. Just underneath the video you'll see there's some links. The top link, if you go to that, that'll let you create your own Mangahigh login for today's session. Once you've done that, make sure you've got pen and paper ready so you can scribble down any working that you need to do. So make sure you're doing that. And whilst you're getting ready, I just remind you how to pass a Mangahigh activity. Now, when you pass, you get a bronze medal. This shows you that you basically understand it and you've done well. Now, every time you try the activity, you'll do 10 questions. And it takes most people 3 goes to get a bronze medal. So they end up doing 30 questions before they get a bronze. So don't give up on your first or even on your second go. Make sure you have at least 3 goes. If you do keep going and get a silver or a gold medal, that means you've gone beyond the level that your teacher would expect. It means you understand the topic even better than you really would need to for a test or an exam. Well, that's great if you can get that. Okay, so I'll give you just a few more moments to make sure you're logged in, and we'll be starting in a few moments' time. So today's topic on a number skill, it's called percentages, and we're going to be finding percentages without a calculator. Now, there are different skills for finding percentages with or without a calculator, and today's session is what you need to do if you're in a test and you don't have a calculator. How are you going to answer those questions? And I'm going to look at those now. Well, the first question here I want to look at is, how do you find 20% of an amount? Well, there are some shortcut ways to do that. It could be, or it will be, one of these 4 answers here. But to do this, you've got to know what 20% means. Well, any percentage simply means it's that amount out of every 100. So it's 20 out of 100. But what does that mean? Well, if you look at what 20 out of 100 means, if you imagine you have 20, another 20, another 20, another 20, and another 25 lots or 5 groups of 20, you can see that I could split 100 into 5 equal groups. Each group would be 1/5. So it's like splitting 100 into 5. So that's 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, and the whole amount 5/5. So that's one way of thinking of 20 out of 100, or 20%. It's a fifth, because 5 20s make 100. Well, if you want to find a fifth of something, chop it into 5 pieces or divide by 5. So the quick way to find 20%, if you recognise it's a fifth of 100, is to divide by 5. That's how you could find 20%. Let's look at this next one. Now, is this true or false? It looks like it's probably true, because 10 add 1 is of course 11. But can you do this with percentages? absolutely true. Yes, you can add and subtract percentages like this, and it's a good job, because if, for example, you knew, let's say 10% of something was let's say 12 meters, and you knew maybe 1% of the amount was 1.2 meters. Suppose you already worked that out and knew that, and you wanted to find what is 11%. Well, you could simply add the 10% and the 1% together to find out the answer, and that in this case would give you 13.2 meters. So it's a good job that you can add percentages together to get other answers. So you could get any percentage you wanted. If you wanted 23% of something, you could add together the 20% and the 3%, and that would help you to get the answer. So you can add and subtract percentages to help you work out other percentages. Let's look at this next question. Now, this is perhaps the most useful percentage of all. 10% helps you to find all of the other percentages. If you double it, you get 20%, times by 7, you get 70%. If you half it, you get 5%. So there are lots of things you can do if you know how to find 10%. Well, let's make sure we know what 10% is. It's 10 out of 100. Now, there's another way of thinking about that fraction. You could, if you wanted, simplify it. I'll just simplify that fraction down, divide the top number or the numerator and the bottom number, called the denominator, by 10, and we get 1/10. So 10% is a tenth, and to get a tenth of something, you always divide it by 10. So you want 10%, you divide by 10, and that's the best percentage you can use. Okay, let's look at some more. Now, in this question here, we spend 44% of your money. The question is, what percentage is left over? Well, the amount you start with we always call 100%. So that's the amount you start with. You're spending or taking away 44%. So that's the amount that's gone. Now, what have we got left? Well, you can add and subtract percentages in just the same way. If you take 44 away from 100, you're left with 56. So 56%. And that's your correct answer just there. So we'll look at two more questions, and then it's going to be over to you to try some questions on Mangahigh. Now let's look at this one here. We're trying to work out 4% of £400. But it's hard to work out 4% straight away. That's not a very easy fraction to work with. Some of the nice fractions are 50%. That's a nice one to work with. 50%. That's just half, or divide by 2. So if you want to find 50%, you can divide something by 2. 10%, that's a really nice fraction. If you want 10% of something, remember what I've just said, you just divide by 10 because it's a tenth. A few others, 25%, that's a nice fraction. That's a quarter, so you can just divide by 4. But 4% is not very nice. So there isn't really an easy way to find 4%, except to find 1% first. Now, what does 1% mean? Well, 1% is 1 out of 100. It's 1/100th. So to get 1%, you've got to divide by 100. You want 1%, you better divide by 100. And if we divide 400 by 100, we get £4. So that's our 1%. But we don't want 1%, we actually want 4%. So we need 4 lots of 1%, or 4 times 4. That gives us 16. So the correct answer would have been £16, just here. Okay, one more question, and then you're going to be trying some. It's fair to say that you're not going to improve on your mathematics, you're not going to get better at maths just by watching videos or even listening to your teacher in class. You get better at maths by practicing it, by getting some questions wrong, by then learning what you got wrong and getting them right. You can listen and learn a bit, but really you learn the most when you try. So I'll do one more question with you, and then it's over to you to practice. So we're trying to work out what 11% of £120 is. And there's no quick way to get 11%. You've got to take your time. Find 10% first, Then find 1%, add them together, and you'll get 11% all together. So how do you get 10%? Well, earlier I said you get 10% by dividing by 10. If I do 120 divided by 10, I get 12. How do you get 1%? You get 1% by dividing by 100. And if I divide 120 by 100, think of it like a decimal, move two places, one place there, and then another place, move in there, moving two decimal places. It's going to be 1.2. Now I can add those together, the 10% and the 1%, and I'm going to get 13.2. And because it's money, I should put two numbers after the decimal point just there. Okay, and there it is, £13.20 would have been the top option. Okay, now it's over to you. On the links underneath the YouTube video, you'll see the second link. It says first topic today. If you click on that link, it will take you straight to today's activity on finding percentages without a calculator. Now, I'm going to give you 15 minutes to try that. That should give you plenty of time to have at least 3 goes. If you get stuck on a question, you can click on the hint option and get some help. And when you've done 10 questions, when you've had a complete go, you can also check on any questions that you've got wrong and check and see what answer you should have put. So when there's about 2 minutes to go, I'll let you know, give you a little warning, and hopefully you'll be able to get a bronze medal. Okay, over to you, and I'll speak to you again in about 15 minutes time. Good luck. So you've got about 2 minutes left, so have another 2 minutes, try a few more questions, and then we'll go on to the second activity. If you're still in the middle of the activity you're doing, you can pause it by clicking on the hint option if you are in timed mode. Okay, so let's stop there on that activity, pause it if you're on the timer, and now come back to the video and we're going to be looking at the second topic. Now, you've already tried an activity on finding percentages without using a calculator. We're going to look at some questions now that involve increasing and decreasing by a percentage. Again, without using a calculator. So you're going to need some of the skills you've just been doing, and you'll also get some practice at those as well as trying some new sorts of questions. So let's look at this one first. If you decrease a number, make it go down by 90%, what percentage of the original will you have afterwards? Well, you always start, the original amount is always called 100% or everything. That's what you start with. And if you make that go down or decrease or take away 90%, you're going to simply be left with 10%. That's all that's going to be left. That's all it's checking. So that's an easy question just to get us started. The right answer would be 10%. So again, this is a skill we had from the activity you've just been doing, and you'll need it for this harder activity. So an easy question is just, what is 10% of £80? Remember, 10% means 1/10, and you find 10% by dividing the amount by 10. If we divide 80 by 10, we'll get £8. So that's our answer just there. Now, in this question, we have 10% already given to us of 110, and we need to find 30%. So we're going to need 3 lots of 10% to get 30%. So 3 lots of 11. Every 11 is worth 10%. If we have 3 of them, we have the answer 33. So the answer is 33. Okay, now hopefully that's just a bit of practice, the sort of skills you've just been doing. So now we'll look at an increase question. So this question is asking us to increase or make 60% go up by 25%. Now 25%, if you think of it as a fraction, hopefully you know it, it's a quarter. And if you want a quarter of something, you just share it or divide it by 4. So if we divide 60 by 4, we'll get 25%. Now, there are a few different ways to divide 60 by 4. My favourite way is to half it. So I'll half it to get 30. And then I'll half it again. And that's, I think, one of the easiest ways to get a quarter of something is to half it and half it again. If you're thinking, why does that work? Well, if we think of a circle and we half it and then we half it again, then that gives us a quarter, just a quarter of the circle. So that's 25%. We halved 60, we halved it again. But this question says increase. So it means we've got to take the 60 and increase it by 25% or increase it by a quarter. So that means then we've got the answer 75, and that would be the correct answer there. Okay, you can see why it's useful to know about some of the percentages that you can easily find. Maybe you can remember them now. If you want 1% of something, you divide by, have a think about it in your head for a moment. If you want 1% of something, you divide by 100. If you want 10% of something, have a think about it for a moment, see if you can remember. Hopefully you've remembered if you want 10% of something, you divide it by 10. If you want 25% of something, we've just done that one. If you want 25%, then it's a quarter, so you divide it by 4. And probably 50%, that's also a good one to do as well. If you want 50%, that's a half, so make sure you divide it by 2. And there are a few others which you might have learned as well, but these are the main ones. So let's look at this question. We're trying to increase 600 by 15%. Well, there isn't an easy way to find 15%. You're best off finding 10% and 5% first, put them together to get 15%. So, how do you get 10%? You divide by 10. So, 600 divided by 10 is 60. How do you get 5%? Well, the easiest way is to use the answer you've just got for 10%. If we half that, we're halving 10%. It gives us 30, and that's 5%. So it's like you've halved the 10% to get 5%. Put these two together, 60 add 30, put them together, you've got 90, and that's your 15%. But the question does say increase, not just find 15%, but increase. Okay, so we better add on this 90 and make 690 as the final answer. Right, we're going to try one more question, and then it's going to be over to you to practice. Now in this question, we've got to make sure we read it correctly. It does say decrease, make it go down in value. We're decreasing £50 by 10%. Well, the first thing to do is work out what 10% is. And we've done that quite a few times today. Hopefully you'll never forget. You want 10% of something, you divide it by 10. There's our answer. There's our £5 just there. And that's just 10%. But the question doesn't say find 10%. It says decrease by 10%. So I've got to take this £5 off the £50. So 50, subtract the 10% to give me the right answer, 45. And so I can get the correct answer just there. Okay, so it's now over to you to practice. Remember, if you get stuck on a question, click on the hint. If you finish your 10 questions and you get to the end screen and you've got a few wrong, click on the questions that you got wrong, go back and check, look at the correct answer, show answer, and see if you can figure out what you did wrong. So you'll find the link to this activity just underneath the video where it says second topic for today. Click on that link, have a go at that activity. You've got about 12-13 minutes to have a go at that activity. I'll let you know 2 minutes before you need to finish on that, and I'll speak to you again in a few minutes time. Okay, over to you. Good luck. Okay, so you've got about 2 minutes left to try those questions. Hopefully you'll have enough time to have at least 3 goes and do 30 questions. I'll let you know when it's time to move on to the last part of today. Okay, so let's stop there on the questions. If you're in the middle of one of the activities and you're in timed mode, then just click on the hint and that'll pause it for you. Okay, so we're going to end by trying some questions on paper. So there's 3 questions for you to try. You don't have to try all of them, but try as many as you can. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to try those. The first one is just a normal question, find 10% of 600 kilograms. Second one's a bit harder, you've got to find 23% of 400 kilograms. And then the last one's a bit of a strange one, see if you can work out how to do that. So over to you for 4 or 5 minutes. Try those on paper. So let's now have a look at how you answer these three questions. First of all, the normal one, finding 10%. Well, hopefully you've seen it a whole lot of times today. You divide by 10 if you want 10%. That's because 10% is the same as 1/10. So all we've got to do is 600 divided by 10 to get 10%, and we've got the answer 60. Don't forget to put the units on. That's kilograms, 60 kilograms. There we go. That's the normal question. This time we want 23%. Well, we're not going to get 23% very easily unless we work out 10% and we work out 1%, and then we use those answers to work out 23%. If we want 10%, we better be dividing by 10. So let's do that. 400 divided by 10, that's equal to 40. So I've got 10%. Let's work out 1%. Let's start with 400 again. Divide by 100 to get 1%. That's equal to 4. Now I want 23%. So I'm going to want 10%, another 10%, and that'll be my 20%. And to save myself time, I'm going to want 3 lots of 1%. That will get me 23%. Well, 10% is 40. Then I'll want another 40, another 10%. Then I'll want 3 lots of 4. 3 lots of 1%. If I put all of that together, I'm going to get 40, 80, add 12, 92. And then that's my answer. Hopefully you got the same answer, 92. And if I had space on the corner of my screen, I'd make sure I write the units in as well, which are kilograms. So let's look at this strange question here. Now, a lot of people get questions like this wrong. You start off with 400 stamps, you increase by 10%, and then you sell them or decrease by 10%. Sounds like you should end up with 400 again because you've gone up by 10% and then down by 10%, but you don't. And here's why. Start off with 400. Let's make it go up by 10%. Let's divide by 10. Let's see what 10% is. 10% of 400 is 40. Let's add that on. Let's add on 40. Make it go up by 10%. And we got the answer 440. That's an increase of 10%. Now we need to make it go down by 10%. But 10% of what? Not 10% of 400. It's going down by 10% of the new amount. That's 440. So you see, it won't go back to 400 because it's going down by a different amount than it's going up by. So we need to find out 10% of the new amount so we can subtract that. 10% of 440 is 44. If we take that off 440, now we'll decrease it by 10%, 44. Now we can get the answer. It's certainly not 400. The answer is 396 once we've taken off 44. And so that's the answer to our last question just there. So hopefully you've not done too badly at percentages today. If you found the activities a bit difficult, a bit tough, then you can try some easier topics by tuning in a couple of hours earlier than the session today. If you're in the UK, that's at 11 a.m. If you found them a bit too easy and you want to try something a bit tougher, then you can try the activity that's designed for older students, aged between 13 and 16, and that starts in about 5 minutes time. So that starts exactly an hour after this session starts, and you're perfectly free to join that if you like. Okay, so if you want to see some more maths lessons and get some more maths with Mangahigh, I'm going to be running lessons tomorrow and also Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week to help you with some of your maths while you're off school. So thanks very much for coming along, and hopefully that helped a bit with your maths. Okay, good luck. Bye bye.